Hello, the unspoken woman. Welcome to the channel. The most interesting people are rarely the easiest people to understand. There is something strangely fascinating about a woman who can sit quietly in a room, say almost nothing, and still leave you wondering what exactly is going on inside her head. And that is where things get interesting. Because some of the habits associated with a Sigma female aren't the obvious ones you've heard 100 times before. It's not simply that she likes being alone, doesn't seek validation, or walks her own path. Those descriptions barely scratch the surface. The truly unusual habits are much quieter. She may replay a conversation from 3 days ago while brushing her teeth. She may deliberately stop initiating contact just to see who notices. She may remember one tiny contradiction someone made 6 months ago, but completely forget where she put her phone 5 minutes ago. And yes, she may occasionally pretend not to understand something she understood perfectly the first time. Psychologists have long studied how humans naturally look for patterns in other people's behavior, and some people are especially attentive to subtle social cues. But here's the fascinating part. The strangest habits aren't always visible from the outside. Sometimes, what looks like indifference is observation. What looks like randomness is actually a private system. And what looks like her doing absolutely nothing may be the moment she's quietly figuring everything out. So today, we're going far beyond the recycled Sigma female clichés. We're getting into 12 genuinely weird, unexpected, and oddly specific habits that can make this personality type so difficult to read. Some will make you nod, some might make you laugh, and a few may make you think, wait, how did you know she does that? Let's get into it. Number 1, they rehearse conversations that already happened. A strange thing about some Sigma females is that a conversation can end in the real world but continue for hours inside her head. She may walk away, continue her day, laugh with someone else, and look completely unbothered. Yet later she starts replaying what was said, not because she is desperate to win an argument. She is studying the conversation. She remembers the pause before someone answered, the sudden change in their voice, the sentence that sounded harmless but felt slightly off. She may even remember a tiny expression the other person probably thought nobody noticed. Then comes the mental replay. Why did they say it that way? Why did they avoid that question? Was that hesitation normal? And sometimes she catches something she missed the first time. This habit can make her seem unusually observant, but it can also become exhausting. Her mind doesn't always know when to clock out. A 5-minute conversation can receive the same investigative treatment as a criminal case, minus the detectives, paperwork, and dramatic music. The most unusual part is that she may never confront anyone about what she noticed. She simply stores the information, and the next time that person speaks, she listens differently. Number 2, they quietly test their own disappearance. One of the strangest habits a Sigma female can have is deliberately becoming less visible without announcing that anything is wrong. She may stop initiating conversations, become quieter in a group, take a break from social media, or simply stop showing up where people are used to seeing her. And then she watches, not dramatically, not with a stopwatch in her hand. She is simply paying attention to what happens when she stops carrying the social relationship on her back. Who notices? Who checks in? Who only remembers her when they need something? Who suddenly becomes interested because her attention is no longer available? This isn't always a healthy habit, and sometimes it can become a silent test that people don't even know they're taking. But for her, the experiment can reveal something uncomfortable. Some relationships only survive because she keeps feeding them. The surprising part is that she may discover the answer without asking a single question. Someone she thought was close might not notice her absence for weeks. Meanwhile, someone she barely expected to care may be the first person to reach out. That information can change everything. She doesn't necessarily disappear because she wants people to chase her. Sometimes she simply wants to know what remains when she stops making herself constantly available. And once she sees the results, she rarely forgets them. Number 3. They have private versions of themselves. A Sigma female can be surprisingly difficult to know completely because she doesn't give everyone the same version of herself. And no, this isn't necessarily fake behavior. She simply believes that access to her personality is earned, not automatically granted. Around certain people, she may be calm and reserved. Around someone she deeply trusts, an entirely different side can suddenly appear. Strange jokes, ridiculous interests, intense curiosity, random opinions, or a level of silliness nobody else would expect. That's what makes it interesting. Someone might spend months thinking they have her figured out, only to discover that they've barely met half of her personality. She may have music she would never play around certain people, hobbies she keeps completely private, ideas she hasn't told anyone, or ambitions that sound nothing like the person everyone sees publicly. And she doesn't feel guilty about the separation. For her, privacy isn't necessarily secrecy. It's ownership. She doesn't believe every thought deserves an audience, every emotion needs an explanation, or every interest needs public approval. Some parts of her life are simply hers. The funny part is that someone can genuinely believe they're extremely close to her, while she still has an entire private universe they know absolutely nothing about. And if she likes it that way, good luck getting the password. Number 4. They can become suspicious when someone is too nice. For a Sigma female, excessive kindness can sometimes create more questions than answers. A normal act of kindness may be appreciated, but when someone suddenly becomes unusually generous, overly complimentary, or intensely interested, her internal alarm system may quietly switch on. She doesn't necessarily think, "This person is fake." Instead, she starts wondering, what changed? That distinction matters. She pays attention to timing. If someone who barely noticed her yesterday suddenly wants to be her best friend today, she may wonder what triggered the transformation. If compliments arrive alongside requests, favors, or hidden expectations, she notices that too. And sometimes she deliberately doesn't react. She accepts the kindness, says thank you, and keeps watching. She wants to see whether the behavior remains consistent when there is nothing to gain. That's where her skepticism can become surprisingly sharp. She knows that genuine kindness doesn't usually need a sales pitch. It doesn't demand immediate loyalty. It doesn't keep reminding you how much someone has done for you. Of course, this habit can go too far. Not everyone being nice has an ulterior motive. Sometimes people are simply being nice, which thankfully is still legal. But once she senses manipulation hiding underneath generosity, her attitude can change quickly. She may remain polite while quietly reducing the amount of access that person has to her. Number 5. They collect tiny details without meaning to. A Sigma female can have an almost annoying memory for little things that other people completely forget. She may not remember what someone said during a long conversation, but she'll remember the one sentence they casually slipped in at the end. A strange change in someone's tone. A name they mentioned once. A promise they made months ago. The fact that they suddenly stopped using a certain phrase. None of these details seem important by themselves, but she stores them anyway. Her mind often works by collecting small pieces and connecting them later. That's why she can sometimes understand a situation before anyone has explained it properly. She isn't necessarily reading minds. She's noticing patterns that most people simply don't bother tracking. The really unusual part is that she may not even realize she's doing it. Someone might casually say, "I don't really go there," and 6 months later she remembers seeing that same person post pictures from the exact place. She may say nothing. She simply files the contradiction away, and that information can quietly change how she sees them. She doesn't need a dramatic confrontation or a detective board covered in red string. One inconsistency may be enough to make her pay closer attention. Her memory isn't always about remembering everything. It's about remembering what didn't quite fit. Number 6. They sometimes pretend not to understand. One of the more unusual habits of a Sigma female is knowing exactly what someone means while acting as if she doesn't understand. At first, this can look confusing. Someone explains something obvious, and she responds with a simple, "What do you mean?" But sometimes she isn't asking because she's lost. She's asking because she wants the other person to keep talking. Why? Because people reveal more when they believe they need to explain themselves. If someone gives a suspicious excuse, she may avoid immediately challenging it. Instead, she lets them explain. The more they talk, the more details they provide. And sometimes those extra details expose contradictions that weren't visible in the original statement. It's a quiet form of observation. She isn't necessarily trying to manipulate anyone. Sometimes she simply doesn't want to waste energy arguing when she can gather information by listening. The fascinating part is what happens afterward. She may nod, say, "Okay," and move on as though nothing happened. Meanwhile, her brain has already registered the explanation, the hesitation, the wording, and the parts that didn't quite match. That can make her difficult to deceive. The person thinks they successfully explained everything. She may already know they didn't. And the funniest part? They might leave the conversation feeling incredibly convincing while she is quietly thinking, "Interesting." Number 7. They abandon things without giving a dramatic explanation. A Sigma female can leave something behind with surprisingly little drama. A friendship, a project, a social circle, even an opportunity can disappear from her life without a long speech, angry announcement, or carefully prepared goodbye. What people often don't see is that she may have been thinking about leaving for a very long time. She notices the repeated disappointments, the same broken promises, the same conversations going nowhere, the same feeling that she is forcing something to survive. But instead of announcing every disappointment, she watches. She gives chances. She waits. She pays attention to whether anything actually changes. And when she finally walks away, other people may be shocked because they only saw the final decision. They didn't see all the small decisions that happened privately before it. That's why her departure can feel sudden when it really isn't. She may have already argued with the situation in her head 100 times. She may have already accepted that things won't change. By the time she physically leaves, the emotional goodbye may have happened long ago, and she doesn't always believe closure requires a conversation. Sometimes closure is simply realizing, "I don't want this anymore." The uncomfortable truth is that she may not hate anyone involved. She may simply stop seeing a reason to stay. And once she reaches that point, convincing her to return can feel like trying to restart a phone after she has already thrown away the charger. Number 8. They have extremely specific do not disturb rituals. A Sigma female may have oddly specific ways of getting herself back to normal after too much noise, conversation, or social activity. She doesn't simply say, "I need some alone time." She may have an entire private routine for it. Maybe she puts her phone on silent, closes the door, makes the same drink, puts on one particular playlist, and spends an hour doing something nobody else would understand. Another day, she might clean one tiny corner of her room, take a long walk, read random articles, or sit quietly doing absolutely nothing. The routine can look strangely specific because it serves a purpose, resetting her mind. She isn't necessarily angry with anyone. She may not even be upset. Sometimes she has simply reached her limit for noise, opinions, questions, notifications, and other people's energy. And once that limit is reached, conversation starts feeling like an unpaid job. That's why interrupting her during this ritual can produce an unusually cold response. Not because she hates the person knocking, but because her brain has finally found 5 minutes of peace, and someone just kicked the door open with, "Hey, quick question." Her solitude has structure. It gives her space to think without having to react to anyone. And when the ritual is over, she often returns noticeably calmer, clearer, and much more willing to deal with the outside world. Number 9. They sometimes Google things instead of asking people. A Sigma female can have an almost stubborn relationship with figuring things out herself. If a question pops into her head, her first instinct may not be to ask someone nearby. She reaches for her phone and starts searching, and one search can quickly become 10. She doesn't just want the answer, she wants to know why the answer is correct. A simple question can turn into a full investigation. She reads an article, checks another source, watches a video, compares opinions, and somehow ends up reading a forum discussion from 3 years ago at 2 in the morning. The funny part is that she may eventually know more about the subject than the person she could have simply asked. But there's a deeper reason behind this habit. Finding things out herself gives her control. She doesn't have to depend on someone's memory, opinion, mood, or willingness to explain something properly. If information is available, she would rather investigate it personally. That independence can be useful, but it can also become excessive. Sometimes she spends 30 minutes researching something that could have been answered in 30 seconds by asking a friend. And if someone finally says, "Why didn't you just ask me?" her answer might be brutally simple, "Because I wanted to know for myself." And somehow, that perfectly explains the entire habit. Number 10. They notice. When someone's personality changes around different people, a Sigma female can pay close attention to how someone behaves when the audience changes. She may notice that a person who acts confident around friends suddenly becomes extremely polite around a boss, or someone who appears kind in public becomes dismissive when nobody important is watching. She doesn't necessarily announce what she's noticed, she files it away. What interests her isn't just the personality someone shows her, it's the difference between their personalities. Who are they when they have nothing to gain? How do they treat someone who cannot help them? Do they become kinder around powerful people and colder around those they consider unimportant? These little shifts can tell her more than a carefully rehearsed introduction ever could. And sometimes the difference is subtle. A person's voice changes. Their jokes become harsher. They interrupt certain people but listen carefully to others. They suddenly become desperate to impress someone who has status. She notices. The funny thing is that she may continue treating the person normally after noticing all of this. She doesn't need to expose them or announce her discovery to the room. She simply updates her opinion, because to her, character isn't what someone claims to be. It's what they consistently become when the social setting changes. And once she sees several different versions of the same person, she starts paying attention to the version that appears when nobody is performing. Number 11. They sometimes manufacture tiny problems to solve. A Sigma female can become strangely restless when everything around her becomes too predictable. Instead of simply enjoying the peace, her mind may start looking for something to figure out, improve, organize, or understand. Suddenly she's rearranging her entire room at midnight because one drawer doesn't make sense anymore. She starts researching a completely random subject because one question bothered her. She decides to learn something she doesn't actually need. She takes apart a routine that was working perfectly just to find a better way of doing it. To everyone else, it can look unnecessary. To her, it's mental stimulation. Her brain enjoys having something to chew on. A small problem gives her a target. There is something to investigate, something to solve, and eventually something to improve. That's why boredom can be surprisingly uncomfortable for her. When there is nothing demanding her attention, her mind may create its own assignment. And sometimes those assignments are completely ridiculous. She might spend an hour comparing two nearly identical products, reorganizing files that were already organized, or researching a question nobody else cared enough to ask. But beneath the odd behavior is a strong desire to stay mentally engaged. She doesn't always need a crisis. Sometimes she just needs a puzzle. And if the world doesn't provide one, she may quietly invent one herself. Number 12. They can spend hours studying something nobody else cares about. A Sigma female can become intensely interested in something that seems completely random to everyone else. One minute she is having a normal day, the next she is researching a strange historical event, learning how something works, comparing obscure theories, or going down an internet rabbit hole that nobody asked her to enter. And once her curiosity is activated, stopping can be surprisingly difficult. She doesn't always need the subject to be useful. It simply needs to be interesting. She might spend 2 hours learning about something she will probably never use, then casually explain it to herself as if she has just completed an important government assignment. The strange part is how deeply she can go. She doesn't want the surface-level answer. She wants the backstory, the reason behind the reason, the disagreement between experts, and the weird detail hidden somewhere near the bottom of page 17. Her curiosity can make her unpredictable, because nobody knows what will capture her attention next. One week, it's psychology. The next week, it's architecture. Then, suddenly, she's fascinated by how watches work. This isn't necessarily about showing off knowledge. In many cases, she doesn't even tell anyone what she's been researching. She simply enjoys understanding things. Her brain treats curiosity like an open door. And once she walks through it, good luck getting her back out before she's learned everything she can. The strange habits often reveal the deeper pattern. The strangest thing about a Sigma female isn't that she does things differently. It's that many of her unusual habits happen quietly, without an announcement, explanation, or need for anyone else to understand them. She observes conversations long after they've ended. She notices tiny details. She disappears to see what happens when she stops carrying every relationship. She researches instead of asking. She studies how people behave when the audience changes. She keeps private parts of herself hidden, walks away without unnecessary drama, and remembers things she may never mention again. But underneath all those strange habits is one common thread. She pays attention. She doesn't always react to what she notices. Sometimes she simply stores it, studies it, and lets it influence her next decision. And that's what makes her so difficult to read. You may think she's quiet when she's actually analyzing. You may think she's forgotten when she's actually remembered. You may think everything is fine because she hasn't complained, when internally she has already reached a completely different conclusion. Of course, not every independent or private woman is a Sigma female, and nobody fits an internet personality label perfectly. But these habits can reveal something genuinely human. Some people process the world far more privately than others. So if you recognized yourself in several of these, don't panic. You aren't necessarily weird. You may simply have a very busy mind and an unusually selective social battery. If you enjoyed this video and want more fascinating insights like this, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this with someone who might recognize a little too much of themselves in these habits. And remember, sometimes the quietest person in the room isn't missing what's happening. She's noticing more than she's saying.